Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. I think one of the things that parents need a lot of reinforcement on when thinking about educating their 2-week kids, especially I get a lot of homeschoolers too who are tapped into my community, is just that timeline piece. I think parents get really stressed about where their child should be, especially when we know our child has so much potential and they might be, doing applied physics and things like this, and then they're lagging in other areas. And so I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot is how do I accept and respect the timeline that my child is on, and where do I push and where do I kind of take a step back? And of course, I always say to kind of go with the strengths and build scaffolding in the other areas. But I, personally really let the child lead in terms of where they want to go with things. And I try not to put too much pressure on kids, especially because these kids often know that they do have deficits or lagging skills in other areas. And I don't want them to feel like they're not meeting up to our standards or our expectations of where they should be. So that is like a pivot, I think, for a lot of parents, is to realize that it's okay if they're, on paper or seemingly really far behind in certain areas, and instead to really focus on their strengths and trust that they are going to catch up in those other areas with support, with patience, and with scaffolding.
Yeah, and I think what that really brings to mind for me is parents can really second guess their decisions and feel really overwhelmed that, they have 10 years of schooling ahead of them, what sort of decisions they're going to make. And maybe you could share a little bit about, I know you have run a lot of different educational experiments at home with your son, Asher. And I don't know about you, but I've sort of come to the thought that it's all about making what feels like the next right step with the information you have right now. Mm-hmm. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I always say that with schooling and education, we have to at least once a year, we have to reassess. Is this still working? And we homeschooled for 6 years. My son is starting high school. Like second grade was his last time in school, and now he's starting 9th grade. That blows my mind. But, and it's not what I predicted would happen, but because we've always set out, at least once a year in the summer, is this still working? How do we need to design our school? What do we need to do differently? And acknowledging, the child's growth and maturity and change of interests and, the abilities that they have now that they might not have, and like kind of letting them test the water, letting them fail a little bit, especially as they get older, and you want to give them more room to be autonomous and do the work independently. So for us, it's been a lot of just constant checking in. I always say that parenting these kids, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So there's no like a long-term plan. And I think that's something many of us crave, but is just not realistic, knowing who these kids are and how they could, if they're motivated, they could learn a year's worth of content in a month, if they have the right drive. So we don't want to hold them back, but we also don't want to push them. So we don't want to push them too much. So we want to always be kind of just, checking in what's working, what isn't, where do we need to pivot? And that has to happen a lot, I think, with these kids.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of people in a lot of countries don't have a lot of options. Mm-hmm. But one thing I'm really getting as you talk is here in the US, we really have a lot of possibilities. So I know a lot of parents come to me feeling, oh my goodness, something needs to change with my child to get them to fit into their school environment and expectations. But really here in the US, we can change to a different public school, try a private school, try homeschooling, try unschooling. Is that your experience with connections?
I think it's, I definitely hear from a lot of parents in other countries where homeschooling isn't an option, and they know that it would be the ideal situation, and that's definitely more challenging. And for those parents, I always encourage, try to work within the system as well as you can, and find ways to supplement outside of school, whether that's with enrichment opportunities like the Gifted Homeschoolers Forum. I always am recommending for parents, whether your kid's in school or not, that's a great way to kind of take some classes or audit some classes. There's actually so many ways to do that. So I think it's really important, if your child is in a more traditional setting where they may not be thriving, to find areas to let them really go deep into at least one area of interest so they can build that confidence and that area of strength.